Okay, so this video is about the sphenoid bone, which is this weird looking bone that we've got here. So let's write its name. So this is a peculiar little bone that sits smack in the middle of your skull, and it's not really visible from the outside, and it also looks super weird, so it's worth having a look at it both by itself and also in the context of an articulated skull. We'll do both. So this video is the disarticulated by itself version. This particular view is the anterior aspect. And let me just switch my computer into tablet mode because my handwriting, when it's actually all in one piece, is pretty atrocious. Okay, so here we go. So this is the anterior aspect of the sphenoid bone. And what you'll see is that it kind of looks like a weird moth where it has some little feet or talons hanging down. It's got two little eyes and then some wings. So the reason I'm letting you know that is because if you think of it as a moth, it's a little bit easier to figure out what you're looking at, how it's supposed to go in the skull, and what all the things are. So that's the reason for it. So having said that, let's get into it. So if we go ahead and turn this sphenoid bone around, which I'm going to do, and just kind of angle it like that. So now we're looking at it from the posterior view. So up here is the anterior side, and then back here is the posterior side. We can see that there are kind of two overall lateral features. So we've got, let's actually make that dot a little bit bigger. These skinny projections at the top here are the lesser wings. And lesser means that they're smaller. So although they're above the greater wings, they are littler and they take up less bony space, so they're considered to be the lesser wings. Now I'm going to do this in a different shade of green just so that we can differentiate, but have both of them highlighted because it's always nice to have some side-by-side contrast. So by contrast, these big guys down here are the greater wings. So lesser and greater wings, the lesser are smaller and superior, and the greater are larger and they are inferior. And then I'll make this in blue. So anything that's not red is something that you potentially need to know. This space here that I'm sort of outlining in blue with my highlighter, so it's a sort of crack rather than a round hole. This is the superior orbital fissure. So fissure refers to the fact that it's a crack and not a hole. And then here's the same thing on the other side. So this is a passage through which some of the blood vessels that supply your eyeballs pass through. And it's not to be confused with these holes here, which I'll do in like neon blue. So these little guys right here, which are the optic canals. They're also sometimes called the optic foramen or foramina, plural. So I will accept either on the practical. If you mean optic canal and you say optic foramen, the distinction isn't really that important to me. I mostly care that you understand that it's optic and therefore the optic nerve passes through it. So I'm going to be a little bit lax as far as what follows this. As long as you don't say process or something that's a sticky outy bit and not a hole, we're good. So the optic canals provide passage for the optic nerves. And your optic nerves leave your eyeballs carrying visual sensory information, and then they cross over the top of this little dent here, which I'll show you in a different view, but the optic nerves cross over the top of the hypophyseal fossa which is the place where your pituitary gland sits. So for that reason, the optic canals are angled inward towards each other. And if you are holding a sphenoid bone in your hand, you can kind of see that. So let's rotate this little guy. And in order to do that, I'm going to get rid of all this. So if I rotate this, and I'm actually going to rotate it to the side first. There we go. That's a nice view. So you can see right here, there's a dent. So this dent is the hypophyseal fossa. So remember, a fossa is a depression or a shallow indentation in a bone, and hypophyseal means pituitary gland. So the hypophyseal fossa is a little dent in which the pituitary gland sits. So it's a bony protection for that very, very important gland. Now, we have a couple of holes to worry about. So let's do those. And so we've done the superior orbital fissure and we've done the optic canal. So now we've got to rotate this down. And we have several foramina to do. So the largest oval ones are the foramina ovale. Now note, this is plural. So if I wanted to refer to only one of them, which is probably what you're going to need to do, I would just say foramen ovale, which means oval hole. And as you can see, it fits the bill. So that's nice and easy. So there's one foramen ovale per side, 2 foramina ovale. So in Latin, if you want to pluralize something, ovale, this is an adjective. It just describes the thing. So you pluralize the noun part, which is foramen or foramina. So I'm just going to rotate this a teensy bit. So behind the foramen ovale, there is the foramen spinosum, which means spiny hole. Now, I know it doesn't look super spiny, but if you look over here, you can see that it's in this little pointy bit, which is a spine. So that's why it's called that. And then this one is the foramen rotundum. Rotund meaning round. So oval hole, round hole, spiny hole. And there's one per side of each of those kinds of holes. So that concludes the portions of the sphenoid bone that you need to know. So if you are looking at the side of the sphenoid bone such that you can see the backside of the hypophyseal fossa, you can see through the 2 superior orbital fissures, and you have a good view, relatively speaking, of all 3 of the foramina on the back. That means you're looking at the posterior aspect of the sphenoid. So let's have a look at that before we conclude this video. There we go. So I can see all 3 of my holes more or less. If I tilt it a little bit, that's better. And then if I turn this around, I can see it looks mothier. And I can only really see the superior orbital fissures here and here. And I can see the foramen rotundum. Don't worry about these. And I can also see through these little windows. If I were to cut this in half, I would find that there was a space underneath the hypophyseal fossa, and that is the sphenoid sinus. So the best view of the sphenoid sinus is achievable by looking at a sagittally sectioned skull, specifically a mid-sagittal section. So if I ask you this on the practical on the real bones, what I'm going to give you is a sagittally sectioned skull, and you'll just need to come up with sphenoid sinus once you realize that it's the airspace under the hypophyseal fossa inside of the sphenoid bone. So thank you for your attention. This has been sphenoid bone. I'll see you in the next video.